So I wanted to come on today and talk to you guys about the importance of nutrition, specifically breakfast, for neuroplasticity and brain health. So the brain makes up just 3% of the total weight of our body, but it takes 20% of the energy consumption of the body. And that's a fifth, which is a lot of the energy consumption for something that actually doesn't take up much of the weight. And that's really just reflecting how important our brain is. So the food that we eat has a huge impact on the biochemistry of the brain. And because the mind is the brain in action, then the food that we eat has a big impact on the mind, on our ability to think clearly, on our ability to focus, and lots of other things that I'm going to talk to you about today. So because we've moved on a lot from Cartesian dualistic thinking that the mind and the body are these separate entities that follow separate rules, we know that the mind and the body are one. They are completely interconnected, and actually your body is just an extension of your brain. It just doesn't have a skull around it. So anything that affects the function of the brain and the function of the mind is going to affect what happens in the whole of the body, the whole of the nervous system, our whole physiology and the emotional state of the body. So if you are like many of the people that skip breakfast, then it's important to know that when you do that, you're depriving your brain of the biochemistry it needs in order to function optimally throughout the rest of your day. And I have worked with a lot of people who tell me that they're just not a breakfast person, and I've been one of those people myself. And to that I say, well, we are all breakfast people. It's just that you've learnt a bad habit. You've fallen into the habit of not having breakfast, and so you have the habit of not feeling hungry for it. But it's important to try and break that habit so that you can fuel your brain in the way that it needs to sustain you throughout the day, to sustain your levels of thinking ability, attention, focus, and your mood as well, which is a really big part of this, your mood and your energy balance. So I work with a lot of people who are experiencing stress, who are experiencing anxiety, self-doubt, emotional and thinking states that have become a habit that they want to move out of. And the way that I work with people, a big part of my approach is to help them utilize self-directed neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to change its structure and its function throughout the lifespan. So we used to think that, the brain stopped being able to change, when we were in our 20s or something like that. But now we know that actually the brain is constantly changing in response to your experience. And the question is, what kind of experience can you give your brain in a way that you're choosing, that you are self-directing to change your brain in ways that you want your brain to be changed, which really means to change your mind and your life in ways that you want to change your mind and your life. So for self-directed neuroplasticity to occur, it's really important that we have the ability to focus, that we have energy, and that we are able to put in the effort in order to do that. And so when we skip breakfast, because of how it affects the biochemistry of the brain, and because of how it affects the energy balance of the brain and the body throughout the rest of the day, it means that actually we are less able to stimulate that because we don't have the same focus. We're less able to focus, we don't have the same energy, and we're not able to put in the same effort because we're not as motivated. We know that when we don't eat breakfast, when we skip on meals and our blood sugar drops, that our mood drops. And when your mood drops and you're experiencing more negative states of mind, more negative emotional states, you don't have the same level of motivation, and you're not thinking in the same way that you would be if you didn't have that drop in blood sugar, and if you had eaten foods that could provide your brain with the biochemistry to sustain you in the day. So a key thing that I like to explain to people is that when you skip breakfast, your level of cortisol rises. And so if you're in the habit of doing this over time, high cortisol levels, which is a stress hormone, hypersensitizes your amygdala. So your amygdala is a part of your brain, I've spoken about it a lot before in previous videos, that is to do with your perception, your detection of threat, and that really is a major part in orchestrating a stress response. So high cortisol levels, which are associated with skipping breakfast, hypersensitize your amygdala. And when your amygdala is hypersensitized, it gets excited. And this isn't a good thing. So when your amygdala is excited, it's much more easy for it to be triggered by things, which is why skipping breakfast is associated with greater stress reactivity, because your amygdala is just flooded with this cortisol and it's really just waiting for something to react to. It's being super vigilant because it's been stimulated by the fact that your brain thinks that you're in a stressful situation because there is cortisol in your body. This is an important part of why higher levels of anxiety and less stability of mood, more experience of subjective stress is associated with not eating properly, and particularly with skipping breakfast, because of the effect that high cortisol levels have on the brain and the body. So another aspect of this is that with high cortisol levels, which is a stress hormone, we become much more vulnerable to stress-derived self-limiting emotions. And those are emotions that encompass things like unworthiness, things like greed, fear, anger, anxiety, mistrust, judgment, victimization. I could go on. So because we can only think in line with how we feel and we feel in line with how we think, the presence of a stress hormone in your body influences your emotional state to be in line with that. And your emotional state influences your thinking state to be in line with that. So when you feel stressed, when you feel emotions of stress, which are always self-limiting, ego-derived emotions, then you will always think in line with how you feel. And so really, there are so many reasons to actually eat a proper breakfast. I just thought I would just summarize the main things that we know. So there is a lot of research that has been done into this. I'm not gonna quote research papers or anything, because seriously, who needs to hear that? But I wanted to just sum up the major findings that we know, the major effects that we know happen on our cognitive ability and on our emotional and energy state in the body when we skip breakfast. The effects of not eating breakfast include difficulty concentrating, poor decision making, decreased episodic and short-term memory, low energy, greater stress reactivity, mood swings, increased anxiety and depression, and decreased problem-solving ability. Eating breakfast, on the other hand, is associated with better attention and focus, increased problem solving, greater vitality and energy, a more balanced mood, the ability to think clearly, better learning capacity, decreased stress reactivity, and decreased anxiety and depression. So the bottom line is that the food we eat is fuel for our brain, and this fuel can either help you to cultivate self-directed neuroplasticity and the ability to change your brain, your mind, your behaviour, your habitual patterns of thinking and feeling for the better, or it can hinder it. And so the question I'd love to hear from you is, are you a breakfast person? Do you always skip breakfast? And if you do always skip breakfast, then I'd love to know if this has provided you with some new insights. Maybe this is like a revelation for you. Maybe this has given you some extra inspiration and motivation to actually eat breakfast. So hit me up with any comments or questions you've got, and I will see all you lovely people soon.